The Black Mesa riders crossed into Arizona just after noon on a Thursday in late September. 8 men, 8 bikes, no support vehicles. They'd left Albuquerque 6 days earlier and followed the same route they always did, north through Farmington, west along the San Juan, then south again where the high desert opened up and the air went dry. They rode in pairs with 50 feet between each set. No formation, no theatrics. Frank Delgado led because he always had. He was 52, owned a landscaping business in Tucson, and hadn't missed a fall run in 14 years. Behind him rode Clayton Wells, a diesel mechanic with a bad shoulder and a worse temper. Third in line was Ray Osborne, 36, the youngest by a decade. He worked construction and still lived in the same apartment he'd rented when he joined the crew. Next to him was Marcus Tate, quiet, methodical, a man who fixed HVAC systems and never spoke unless the silence demanded it. The others followed. Lou Henniger, Tommy Ruiz, Gil Montoya, Eddie Cass. All of them middle-aged. All of them carrying mortgages, ex-wives, kids in college or jail. None of them rich, none of them reckless. They rode because it was the one thing in their lives that hadn't changed. The rest area sat 12 miles past the state line, a gravel lot with 4 picnic tables, 2 vault toilets, and a rusted historical marker no one ever read. The Black Mesa crew had stopped there every year since Frank started the run. It was habit, nothing more. Frank signaled and pulled off the highway. The others followed without discussion. Engines cut one by one, boots hit gravel. No one spoke. They stretched, drank water, checked oil levels. Clayton walked to the toilets. Lou sat on a table and smoked. That's when Ray noticed the van. It was parked at the far end of the lot. A white panel van with no markings backed into a space near the tree line. 4 men stood near it. They weren't sitting. They weren't eating. They were standing, arms crossed, watching the bikes roll in. Ray didn't point them out. He didn't need to. Everyone saw. Frank walked toward the van, not close, just far enough to make the gesture clear. A nod. Recognition. Respect for shared space. One of the men nodded back. That was it. Frank returned to the bikes. "We're not staying long," Frank said. No one argued. Ray moved to the edge of the lot, pretending to check his rear tire. He looked at the men again. 3 of them were unfamiliar. Broad, sunburned, mid-40s. The 4th was younger. Thin face, dark hair, hands in his jacket pockets. Ray stared longer than he should have. He knew that face. Marcus walked up beside him. Problem? Ray shook his head no. Marcus didn't push. He walked back toward the others. Ray stood there another 10 seconds, then forced himself to turn away. He rejoined the group. They mounted up. Frank led them back onto the highway. For the next hour, no one spoke through the helmet comms. They rode hard, pushing 70 on the straightaways, 80 where the road dipped and the wind cut clean. The desert spread wide on both sides, flat, pale, endless. Ray kept his eyes on the road, but his mind stayed behind. That face. He'd seen it before. Not in passing. Not at a bar or a rally. Somewhere specific. Somewhere that mattered. They stopped for gas in a town called Sentinel. It was small, barely more than a crossroads with a single pump and a convenience store built from cinder blocks. Frank filled his tank while the others wandered inside for coffee and jerky. Ray stood apart, leaning against his bike. Clayton walked over. "You good?" Clayton asked. "Yeah." "You don't look it." Ray pulled off his gloves. "Just tired." Clayton studied him, then nodded. "We all are." Inside the store, Lou was arguing with the clerk about the price of cigarettes. Tommy and Gil stood by the cooler, debating whether to push on to Yuma or stop early. Eddie paced near the door, checking his phone for service that wouldn't come. Marcus bought a map even though he didn't need one. He unfolded it on the counter and traced the route with one finger, the same route they took every year. The clerk didn't care. Frank came in last. He paid for gas, bought a bottle of water, and walked outside without a word. They left Sentinel 20 minutes later. The sun dropped lower, turning the sky orange, then red. Shadows stretched long across the highway. The temperature fell. They rode into the wind, helmets cutting through it, engines steady and loud. Ray stayed in formation, but his hands were tight on the grips. He kept replaying the moment at the rest area, the way the man stood, the way he looked back, the way he didn't move. By the time they reached the motel in Gila Bend, it was full dark. The Black Mesa crew parked in a row outside their rooms, same as always. They unloaded their gear in silence. Frank distributed keys. Everyone disappeared into their own space. Ray sat on the edge of his bed, boots still on, staring at the wall. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't call anyone. He just sat there, thinking about the van and the men who weren't supposed to be there. He knew the rules. Don't touch what isn't yours. Don't ask questions you don't want answered. Don't bring trouble into the crew. But he also knew what he'd seen, and he knew it wouldn't stay buried. They left Gila Bend before sunrise. No breakfast, no conversation. Frank knocked on each door at 5:30, and by 6 they were on the road. The morning air was cold enough to sting through their jackets. The sky was still dark in the west, pale gray to the east. Ray rode in his usual position, third in line, but he felt off. His throttle hand was too tight. His turns came late. Marcus noticed, but didn't say anything. No one did. They stopped for coffee in Ajo, a mining town that had been dying for 40 years. The diner was empty except for an old man at the counter and a waitress who looked like she'd worked the same shift since the 80s. The Black Mesa crew sat at 2 tables pushed together. They ordered eggs, toast, coffee. The food came fast and tasted like nothing. Ray sat at the end, stirring his coffee without drinking it. Lou was telling a story about a job he'd worked in Flagstaff, something about a frozen pipe in a flooded basement. Tommy laughed. Gil shook his head. Eddie stared out the window. Frank watched Ray from across the table. "You sleeping okay?" Frank asked. Ray looked up. "Yeah." "You sure?" "Yeah." Frank didn't believe him, but he let it go. They finished eating and paid in cash. Outside, the sun was up, flat and white against the horizon. The bikes were still cold. They started them one by one, let them warm, then pulled back onto the highway. The route west took them through open desert. No towns, no rest stops, just asphalt and dust. The road was straight for miles at a time. It should have been easy. But Ray kept thinking about the van. He tried to place the face, not from work, not from the crew, not from any rally or bar he'd ever been to. Somewhere else. Somewhere he shouldn't have been. Then it came to him. Phoenix, 3 years ago. A warehouse off Van Buren. Ray had gone there with a guy he knew from a job site. A guy who said he could get cheap tools, no questions asked. Ray needed an impact driver and didn't have the cash to buy new. He went once, bought what he needed, and never went back. The man at the warehouse had been there. Thin face, dark hair, standing near a loading dock talking to someone Ray couldn't see. Ray hadn't thought about it since, but now, standing at that rest area, the man had been 12 feet away, and he'd looked right at Ray. Ray's stomach tightened. He didn't know if the man recognized him. He didn't know if it mattered. But the fact that he was there with 3 other men in a van, miles from anywhere, wasn't random. The Black Mesa crew stopped for lunch in a town called Y. It wasn't much. A gas station, a taco stand, a few trailers scattered in the dirt. They ate under a metal awning that rattled in the wind. The tacos were good. No one complained. Clayton sat next to Ray, chewing slowly. "You're quiet today." "I'm always quiet." "Not like this." Ray didn't answer. Clayton finished his taco and crumpled the foil. "You got something on your mind, say it, don't let it sit." Ray looked at him. "It's nothing." Clayton didn't push. He stood, tossed the foil in a trash barrel, and walked back to his bike. Marcus came over next. He didn't sit. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching Ray. "You recognize someone," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Ray hesitated, then he nodded. "At the rest area?" "Yeah." Marcus waited. "I don't know his name," Ray said. "But I've seen him before, Phoenix, a few years back." "Doing what?" Ray looked up. "Nothing I should have been doing." Marcus didn't react. He just stood there thinking. Then he said, "Does Frank know?" "No." "You planning to tell him?" Ray didn't answer. Marcus crouched down so they were eye level. "Listen to me. If this is something that could come back on the crew, Frank needs to know. Not later. Now. It's not. You don't get to decide that." Marcus's voice was calm, but there was weight behind it. "You brought it here, so finish it." Marcus stood and walked away. Ray sat there for another minute, then got up and found Frank near the bikes. Frank was checking his oil, wiping the dipstick with a rag. "Frank." Frank looked up. "I need to talk to you." Frank set the dipstick down. "Go ahead." Ray glanced around. The others were scattered. Lou at the gas pump, Tommy on his phone, Clayton smoking by the awning. No one close enough to hear. "That rest area yesterday," Ray said. "One of those guys, I know him." Frank's expression didn't change. "From where?" "Phoenix 3 years ago, a warehouse. I went there once to buy tools. He was there." "What kind of warehouse?" Ray hesitated. "The kind you don't ask about." Frank wiped his hands on the rag, slow and deliberate. Then he folded it and tucked it into his saddlebag. "And you think he recognized you?" "I don't know. But you're not sure he didn't?" "No." Frank looked past Ray toward the highway. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Did anyone else see you looking at him?" Marcus noticed something was off. Frank nodded. "All right. Here's what we do. We finish the run. We don't change the route. We don't act different. If it's nothing, it stays nothing. If it's something, we deal with it when we get home. What if they're following us?" Frank met his eyes. "Then we'll know soon enough." He walked back to his bike and started it. The crew mounted up. They rode west into the heat, into the silence. Ray fell back into formation, but his hands were shaking. He'd broken the first rule. He'd brought something in. They reached the California border by mid-afternoon. The road flattened out, the desert gave way to irrigated fields, and the air turned heavy with dust and diesel. The Black Mesa crew didn't stop. They pushed through Brawley, then El Centro, then followed the 8 west toward San Diego. Frank had planned to camp that night near the Laguna Mountains, a spot they'd used before, a pullout with fire rings and enough space for 8 tents. But 20 miles outside of Pine Valley, he changed his mind. He signaled and pulled into a truck stop instead. The crew followed him in, engines cutting one by one in front of a diner that sat between 2 rows of semis. The lot was busy, drivers coming and going, air brakes hissing, diesel fumes thick in the air. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't private. That was the point. Frank dismounted and walked inside without explanation. The others followed. They took a corner booth near the back. A waitress brought coffee and menus. No one ordered food. They just sat there, waiting for Frank to speak. He didn't, not right away. Clayton broke the silence. "We're not camping tonight." "No," Frank said. "Why not?" Frank looked at Ray. "Tell them." Ray's chest tightened. He glanced around the table. All eyes were on him. Lou, Tommy, Gil, Eddie, Marcus, Clayton. Faces he'd known for years, men who'd trusted him. "There was a guy at that rest area," Ray said. "The one in Arizona. I recognized him." "From where?" Lou asked. "Phoenix 3 years ago. A warehouse off Van Buren. I went there to buy tools." Tommy leaned back. "What kind of warehouse?" "The kind that doesn't ask for receipts." No one said anything for a moment. Then Clayton spoke. "And you think this guy recognized you?" "I don't know, but it's possible." "Yeah." Eddie shook his head. "Jesus, Ray. I didn't know he'd be there," Ray said. "Doesn't matter," Eddie said. "You brought it in." Gil set his coffee down. "What were they doing? The guys at the rest area. Were they waiting for someone?" "I don't know," Ray said. "They were just standing there watching." "They didn't follow us," Marcus said. "I've been checking. No van, no tail." "Doesn't mean they're not looking," Clayton said. Frank raised a hand. The table went quiet. "Here's what we know," Frank said. "Ray saw a guy he shouldn't have. That guy may or may not have recognized him. We don't know if it matters. We don't know if they're connected to anything that could come back on us. But we're not taking chances." "So what are we doing?" Lou asked. "We stay public tonight," Frank said. "We don't camp, we don't split up. We stay here in this lot where there's cameras and witnesses. Tomorrow we finish the run. We get home, and we don't talk about this to anyone outside this crew." "And if they show up?" Tommy asked. Frank's expression didn't change. "Then we handle it." The waitress came back. Frank ordered a burger he wouldn't eat. The others ordered out of habit. The food came, and most of it stayed on the plates. Ray sat with his hands in his lap, staring at the table. He could feel the weight of it. What he'd done, what it might mean. He'd been careful his whole life, kept his head down, followed the rules, and now this. After an hour, they left the diner and walked back to the bikes. The sun was setting, the sky turning orange and purple over the mountains. The lot was still busy. Trucks idling, drivers walking in and out of the building. Frank pointed to a spot near the edge of the lot under a light. "We park there, we stay close, no one goes anywhere alone." They moved the bikes into position, locked them, and set up a loose perimeter. Gil and Eddie sat on a curb, backs to the wall. Lou and Tommy leaned against their bikes, smoking. Clayton paced. Marcus stood near Frank, arms crossed, watching the highway. Ray stayed apart, sitting on the ground with his back against his rear tire. He wasn't tired, but he felt hollowed out. Around 10, a white van pulled into the lot. Ray saw it first, his chest seized. He stood without thinking. Marcus noticed. He followed Ray's line of sight. The van drove slowly through the lot, past the semis, past the fuel pumps. It didn't stop. It circled once, then pulled out onto the highway and disappeared. Ray exhaled. "Was that them?" Marcus asked. "I don't know," Ray said. "I couldn't see the plates." "But it could have been." "Yeah." Marcus walked over to Frank and spoke quietly. Frank nodded, then called the crew together. "We're leaving," Frank said. "Now." "It's almost midnight," Lou said. "I don't care. Get your gear. We're riding." No one argued. They packed in silence, mounted up, and started their engines. The lot was bright with floodlights, but beyond it, the highway was dark. They rolled out in formation, heading west into the mountains. Ray rode with his jaw clenched, his eyes scanning every vehicle they passed. He didn't know if the van was following. He didn't know if it mattered. But the decision had been made 3 years ago in a warehouse he never should have entered, and now the crew was paying for it. They rode for 2 hours without stopping. The road climbed into the mountains, winding through pine forests and granite cliffs. The air turned cold. The bikes strained on the inclines. No one spoke through the comms. Finally, Frank pulled off into a Forest Service road, a narrow dirt path that led into the trees. He killed his engine. The others followed. They were alone. No lights, no sounds except wind in the pines. Frank dismounted and walked to the center of the group. "We sleep here," he said. 2-hour watches. Marcus, you're first, then Clayton, then me. Everyone else get some rest. They set up camp without tents, just sleeping bags spread on the dirt. Ray lay down but didn't close his eyes. He stared up at the trees, their branches black against the stars. He knew what was coming. He just didn't know when. They reached the coast 2 days later. The ride down from the mountains had been quiet, tense. No one joked. No one complained about the cold or the long hours. They just rode, keeping tight formation, eyes on the mirrors. The van never appeared again. By the time they hit the Pacific Coast Highway, the crew had started to relax. Not much, but enough. The ocean stretched out to the west, gray and endless. The road hugged the cliffs. Salt air cut through their helmets. It felt like the end of something. Frank led them to a campground south of Oceanside, a place they'd stayed before. Dirt sites with fire pits, picnic tables bolted into concrete, restrooms that smelled like bleach and mildew. They set up camp in silence, the same way they'd done everything for the past 2 days. That night they built a fire. Lou cooked hot dogs on a stick. Tommy opened a 6-pack he'd been carrying since New Mexico. Clayton sat on a cooler, staring into the flames. Ray stayed at the edge of the firelight, arms wrapped around his knees. Frank sat across from him, watching. "You did the right thing," Frank said, "telling me." Ray didn't respond. "I mean it," Frank said. "You could have kept quiet, you didn't. Doesn't change what I brought in." Frank poked the fire with a stick. "No, it doesn't." They sat in silence for a while. Then Marcus spoke up from the other side of the circle. "We need to talk about what happens when we get home." Everyone looked at him. "We don't know if those guys were connected to anything," Marcus continued. "We don't know if they were even looking for Ray. But if they were, and if they know his face, they might know more. Where he works, where he lives." "So what are you saying?" Lou asked. "I'm saying Ray needs to be careful, and we need to decide if we're sticking together on this or if we're cutting him loose." The words hung in the air. Eddie stood up. "You serious right now?" "Yeah, I'm serious," Marcus said. "This crew's been riding together for over a decade. We've never had trouble. Never had cops asking questions. Never had anyone looking at us twice. That's because we follow the rules. And Ray broke them. I didn't mean to, Ray started. Doesn't matter what you meant, Marcus said. You went to a place you shouldn't have. You put yourself in a position to be recognized. And now we're all looking over our shoulders. Clayton tossed his cigarette into the fire. So what do you want? You want to vote him out, that it? I want to know we're all on the same page, Marcus said. Because if something happens when we get back, if someone shows up at Ray's place or at one of ours, I need to know this crew's going to handle it the right way. What's the right way? Tommy asked. Marcus looked at Frank. You tell me. Frank was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Waves broke against the rocks below the campground. Finally, he spoke. We don't cut anyone loose, Frank said. That's not how this works. Ray made a mistake, but he's one of us. So if trouble comes, we deal with it. Together. And if it gets bad? Marcus asked. Frank met his eyes. Then it gets bad, but we don't turn on each other. Marcus nodded slowly. He didn't look satisfied, but he didn't argue. The conversation died after that. One by one, the crew drifted off to their tents. Ray stayed by the fire until it burned down to coals. Then he walked to his bike and sat on the ground beside it, staring out at the darkness. He knew Marcus was right. He'd brought this in, and no matter what Frank said, the crew would remember. They left the coast the next morning and headed inland toward home. The plan was to split up in Riverside. Some would head north toward LA, others east toward Arizona. It was the same way they always ended the run. A handshake, a nod, see you next year. But this time it felt different. They stopped for gas outside Temecula. While the others filled their tanks, Ray walked to the restroom. It was a single stall, door heavy, lock rusted. He stepped inside and splashed water on his face. When he came out, a man was standing near his bike. Ray froze. The man was in his 40s, wearing jeans and a black jacket. He wasn't one of the guys from the rest area. Ray had never seen him before. But the way he stood, hands in his pockets, weight on one leg, told Ray everything he needed to know. Frank was already walking toward them. So was Marcus. Help you with something? Frank asked. The man didn't look at Frank. He looked at Ray. You Ray Osborne? Ray's mouth went dry. He nodded. Someone wants to talk to you. About what? Marcus said. The man ignored him. There's a diner 2 miles up the road. Be there in an hour, alone. He's not going anywhere alone, Frank said. The man finally looked at Frank. Then he doesn't go at all, and we come find him later. Who's we? Marcus asked. The man smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. People you don't want to know. He turned and walked to a truck parked at the far end of the lot. He got in, started it, and drove away. The crew gathered around Ray. No one spoke for a moment. Then Clayton said, What the hell was that? Ray's hands were shaking. I don't know. You're not going, Lou said. I have to. Like hell you do, Eddie said. Frank held up a hand. Ray, what do you think they want? I don't know, Ray said. But if I don't show up, they'll come looking. And they won't just come for me. Frank looked at the road, then back at Ray. All right, you go. But we follow. At a distance. You sit down, you talk, and if anything feels wrong, you walk out. We'll be close. Ray nodded. And Ray, Frank said, whatever happens in there, you don't make promises, you don't agree to anything, you just listen, understand? Yeah. They mounted up and rode north. 2 miles later, they found the diner. It was small, old, built from cinder blocks and aluminum siding. The parking lot was empty except for 2 cars. Ray pulled in. The others rode past and parked a 1/4 mile up the road out of sight. Ray walked inside. The man from the gas station was sitting in a booth near the window. Across from him sat the thin-faced man from the rest area, the one Ray had recognized. Ray's stomach dropped. Sit down, the thin-faced man said. Ray sat. The man studied him for a moment, then smiled. You remember me? Ray nodded. Good. That saves time. He leaned back. 3 years ago, you came to a warehouse in Phoenix. You bought an impact driver. Cash, no receipt. Yeah. You see anything else while you were there? Ray's throat was tight. No. The man's smile faded. Don't lie to me. I'm not. I walked in, I bought what I needed, I left. The man watched him, then he said, You tell anyone about that place? No. You sure? Yes. The man glanced at his companion, then back at Ray. Here's the thing. That warehouse burned down 2 months after you were there. Federal investigation. Someone talked. We need to know who. Ray's heart pounded. It wasn't me. I never said a word. Not to anyone. The man leaned forward. Then why were you staring at me at that rest area? Because I recognized you, that's it. And your friends, they notice? Ray hesitated. One of them did. What did you tell him? That I'd seen you before, that's all. The man sat back. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, You're going to forget you ever saw me. You're going to forget that warehouse. You're going to forget this conversation. And if anyone ever asks, cops, feds, anyone, you don't know a damn thing. Understand? Ray nodded. Good. The man stood. Because if I hear your name again, it won't be a conversation. He walked out, the other man followed. Ray sat there alone, hands flat on the table. He waited 5 minutes, then he got up and walked outside. The crew was waiting at the bikes. Frank looked at him. You all right? Ray nodded. What did they want? To make sure I keep my mouth shut. And? I will. Frank studied him, then nodded. Let's go home. They rode east into the desert, into the heat. The road stretched out ahead of them, long and empty. Ray knew the crew would never look at him the same way again, and he knew the run was over. Not just this one. All of them. They reached Tucson 4 days later. The ride back had been mechanical. Gas, food, sleep, repeat. No one talked unless they had to. The comm stayed quiet. At night, they set up camp and sat around fires that no one bothered to feed. Ray rode at the back of the line now. Not because anyone told him to, he just did. They pulled into Frank's driveway on a Sunday afternoon. The street was quiet. Kids on bikes. A neighbor mowing his lawn. Normal life. The kind that kept going whether you were part of it or not. Frank killed his engine. The others did the same. They stood in a loose circle, hands in pockets, boots scuffing the concrete. No one seemed to know what to say. Lou spoke first. Hell of a ride. No one agreed. Tommy checked his phone. I gotta get home. Wife's been calling. Yeah, Eddie said. Me too. They started to peel off one by one. Handshakes, nods. See you around. The words felt hollow. Clayton walked up to Ray. He didn't say anything, just looked at him for a moment, then clapped him on the shoulder and walked to his bike. Gil and Lou left together. Tommy followed. Eddie lingered for a minute, then shook his head and rode off. Marcus was the last to go. He stood next to Ray, arms crossed, staring at the ground. You didn't mean for this to happen, Marcus said. No, but it did. Ray didn't answer. You understand what that means, right? Marcus said. This crew, what we had, it's done. Not because of what you did. Because of what we know now. That it can fall apart. That one mistake is all it takes. He walked to his bike, started it, and rode away without looking back. Ray and Frank were alone. Frank leaned against his truck, arms folded. He looked tired. Older than he had 2 weeks ago. You gonna be all right? Frank asked. I don't know. Frank nodded. Yeah, me neither. I'm sorry, Ray said. I know you are. Frank pushed off the truck, but sorry doesn't put it back together. He walked inside his house and closed the door. Ray stood there for a while alone in the driveway. Then he got on his bike and rode home. The apartment was the same as he'd left it. Dishes in the sink, mail on the counter, the air stale and warm. He dropped his gear on the floor and sat on the couch. He thought about calling someone, one of the crew, just to check in, but he didn't. The days passed. Ray went back to work. He framed houses, poured concrete, carried lumber. His hands stayed busy, but his mind didn't. He kept replaying the run, the rest area, the diner, the look on Marcus's face. No one from the crew called. No one texted. The group chat stayed silent. 3 weeks later, Ray rode past Frank's house on his way home from a job. Frank was in the driveway working on his truck. Ray slowed, thinking about stopping. But Frank didn't look up. Ray kept riding. In October, Lou sold his bike. Ray heard about it from a guy at a parts shop. Lou didn't post about it, didn't say goodbye, just sold it and moved on. In November, Tommy started riding with a different crew, Younger guys, louder bikes. Ray saw a picture on social media. Tommy grinning, arm around some kid in a Harley shirt. The caption said, "New pack, new roads." Ray didn't comment. By December, the Black Mesa riders didn't exist anymore. Not officially. There was no announcement, no meeting, no final ride. It just ended. Ray still had his bike. He rode sometimes early in the morning before work, out into the desert where the roads were empty and the sky was wide. But it wasn't the same. Riding alone never was. He thought about that rest area sometimes. About the man with the thin face. About what would have happened if he'd just kept his head down, stayed by the bikes, not looked twice. But he had looked. And he'd recognized something he wasn't supposed to. And that was enough. One night in January, Ray was coming home from a job site when he saw Clayton's truck at a gas station. He almost kept driving. But something made him pull in. Clayton was filling his tank, eyes down, focused on the pump. Ray got off his bike and walked over. "Hey," Ray said. Clayton looked up. He didn't smile, but he nodded. "Ray, how you been?" "Good, you?" "All right." They stood there in silence. The pump clicked off. Clayton replaced the nozzle and closed his gas cap. "You still riding?" Ray asked. "Some," Clayton said. "Not like before." Ray nodded. Clayton looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months. "It wasn't your fault, you know." "Feels like it was." "Yes, but it wasn't." Clayton pulled his keys from his pocket. Sometimes things just fall apart, doesn't always need a reason. He got in his truck and drove away. Ray stood there alone under the fluorescent lights. He thought about what Clayton said, about things falling apart, about reasons. He didn't know if he believed it. But it didn't matter. The crew was gone. The runs were over. And the road, the one they'd ridden together for 12 years, had moved on without them. Ray got back on his bike. He didn't know where he was going. He just rode. The engine hummed. The wind cut cold. The highway stretched out ahead, empty and dark. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice he didn't want to hear whispered the truth he'd been avoiding. The road doesn't forgive, it only remembers.